Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service. I'm Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom, and I'm honored to serve as the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's senior minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all you're bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to guests who are joining us today. If you're visiting for the first time or joining us from afar, why don't you say hello in the chat now and tell us where you're joining us from? I welcome everyone into our worship service by inviting you to repeat our first church mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Let's go now to our beloved sanctuary to light the chalice, which is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism.
A quote by Leslie Jameson. Empathy isn't just something that happens to us, a meteor shower of synapses firing across the brain. It's also a choice we make, to pay attention, to extend ourselves. It's made of exertion, that dowdier cousin of impulse. Sometimes we care for another because we know we should, or because it's asked for. But this doesn't make our caring hollow. The act of choosing simply means we've committed ourselves to a set of behaviors greater than the sum of our individual inclinations. This confession of efforts chafes against the notion that empathy should always rise unbidden, that genuine means the same thing as unwilled, that intentionality is the enemy of love. But I believe in intention, and I believe in work. I believe in waking up in the middle of the night and packing our bags and leaving our worst selves for our better ones.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you
Thank you so much to our virtual choir. It's so wonderful to see our First Church members. Oh my God, that's not what I meant. Some of the biggest fights I have gotten into with my loved ones have been about the relationship between intention and impact. And I mean yelling, crying, furious fights that are about so much more than what was said or what was done. They're about character and trust and worth. Let me just outline the argument and see if it sounds familiar to you. One person says or does something they think is reasonable or even innocuous, and the other person gets upset. The upset person explains how the actions or the words affected them in a negative way, and then the first person says, "That's not what I meant." An argument ensues. Does that sound familiar to anyone? From up on the balcony, talking about it in outlines, it might sound silly, but from the trenches of the argument, the stakes can feel pretty high. For the person who said or did the upsetting thing, it can be about character. I wouldn't have done something to hurt you. I wouldn't mean it the way you're taking it. I'm not that kind of person. For the person who's upset, it can be about worth. I'm telling you how the thing you did affected me. I'm hurt. And if I mattered to you, you would care about that and not be getting so defensive right now. Trust is often at stake on both sides. Don't you trust me to know that I didn't mean that? Or don't you trust me enough to believe me when I tell you how the thing you did hurt me? This is the arrow between intent and action and impact. It doesn't always shoot a straight line from origin to impact, and sometimes it goes way off the mark. I remember one time I went to dinner with my sister, and at the end of dinner, we split the bill. She was calculating the tip, and I saw her thinking, so I wanted to help. I started to say, "You just have to double the tax." And I got out about 3 words before she looked up, glaring at me. It was the type of sister look that stops you in your tracks, so I froze like a deer in the headlights. "I've got it," my sister said. When she was done, I ventured in cautiously. "I was just trying to help," I said. That's my statement of intent. Yeah, she said, clearly still annoyed. "I don't want your help with math. It connects to a lot of hurt from when we were kids." That's my sister's statement of impact. This thing you did, offering to help me with math, hurt because it connects to hurt from another time. I was lucky enough to understand in this instance exactly what she was talking about. When we were kids, I was her math tutor for a year or two when she was struggling in the subject. It didn't go super well, and I am sure my teenage self was not the most careful or loving explainer of math problems. It also set up a dynamic where I was the right sister, the big one, the older one who knew things. And I was telling my younger sister about it all the time in an area in which she felt confused and frustrated. I caused harm back then. I was not intentionally mean, but I also was not skilled, and I trampled about in a tender place and I hurt her. I did not, however, realize she still had heard about it, and I was surprised in the moment about the strength of her feelings about that tip and the math. I didn't push it though, I just apologized. But in that moment, I learned more about my sister and our relationship. This happened about 7 years ago, and I have not, to my knowledge, offered to help my sister with any math since then. I've also reflected on how my behavior when I was tutoring her hurt her, and I've tried to be more sensitive about the topic in general. Our interaction that day when I unintentionally hurt her feelings gave me more insight into her experience, but also our relationship. I can see clearly the line from the arrow arching out from my intentions and then taking a curve and missing the mark. Not intending to hurt my sister doesn't undo the hurt, however. And in the moment of hurt, my intentions aren't the priority. When the arrow of our intention goes astray, takes a curve, and hurts someone, tending to the hurt is the priority in the moment. I mean, if any of us literally shot someone with an arrow accidentally, we would understand this like immediately, instinctively. We would immediately attend to the hurt and probably be apologizing with some urgency. I mean, I do this even if I accidentally bump into somebody on the street. Oops, I'm so sorry. The apology comes first. For some reason, this is harder to remember with feelings than it is with bodies, but it's just as true. When someone is hurt, our priority has to be to access compassion, whether we understand why the hurt is happening or not. The long-term important learning then comes from listening to the person who got hurt about why the action didn't land as intended. In Leslie Jamison's book, The Empathy Exams, from which our worship associate shared an excerpt this morning, Jamison writes that empathy, quote, comes from the Greek empathia, which means into, and pathos, which means feeling. She then asks us to think of empathy as a kind of travel, suggesting that, quote, we enter another person's pain as you'd enter another country, through immigration and customs border crossing by way of query. What grows where you are? What are the laws? What animals graze here? If we use empathy to travel, we enter into another land humbly and with respect. In the example with my sister, it was easy for me to understand the pool of hurt that my arrow took a turn and landed in because I had been there too. She was able to make a short reference and I understood immediately. In relationships that have less history and less trust, this is a lot harder. We can never know everything about another person's history and experience or how our words or actions might impact them, from coworkers to family members to partners. When we don't know, it's time to engage the work of empathy, asking questions, listening, trusting the other person is telling us their truth, intentionally entering the land of another person's experience with respect and humility. Fear can interrupt the empathy journey for the person who's caused harm. The part of you that is screaming, but that's not what I meant. I'm not that kind of person, might be afraid of entering into the land of the other person's experience, because if the way that they experienced your words or action caused harm, they might contradict your intentions. They might even contradict your sense of self. What if in that moment, you just acknowledged to yourself, not out loud, to yourself, no, that's not what you meant. No, you're not that type of person. in order to calm the part of you that's afraid of being misunderstood or mischaracterized? Would it be possible for you to show up for yourself, grounded in who you are, so you don't need the other person to do that work for you? Can you show up for yourself in the moment, calming the scared parts so that you can show up for the person that you unintentionally hurt? For the person who has experienced harm, the pain of the harm, that hurt, might interrupt the empathy journey. In the moment, tending to that hurt is the priority. Depending on what kind of hurt it is and how deep and old the pool is, tending to the hurt might take some time. If the person who bumped into it can't tend to it, it's okay to focus on yourself in that moment rather than the relationship and just tend to that pool of pain. You could ask yourself, what does that pain need from you? Could ask it how you might show up for it. Later, after your hurt is cared for and when you have energy, you could choose to return to the work of empathy if you're invested in the relationship in which the hurt occurred. You could ask, why might the other person not understand your experience? Why do they not know where you're coming from? It's their work to attend to and learn about your hurt. And you don't have to teach them if it stirs up too much pain. But if you want to invest in the relationship and this person is ready to listen and learn with an open heart, telling them about your experience or giving them enough of an outline to do their own further research could build a bridge towards understanding. Trying to do this work of empathy when an arrow has flown awry from intention to impact, when there is difference involved, can make it even more difficult. Difference makes it harder to do the trust work of listening and understanding because the people who are involved aren't drawing from the same pools of experience. So easy reference to some past harm isn't there. For example, when people are connecting across the difference of race, the arrow can fly awry, take a turn from intention to impact if a white person references a racist stereotype that they were not consciously aware of. Sadly, this happens all the time, both because these stereotypes are so rampant in our society, but also because white people are protected from needing to know what they all are. White folks have these stereotypes embedded in their consciousness just through being out in the world without necessarily being aware of them. Then in a cross-racial relationship with a person of color, they reference the stereotype and really cause harm with someone with whom they're in relationship because it's accessing a deep pool of harm caused by the racism and white supremacy that we're all swimming in. I remember sitting with a Black friend and colleague, we'll call him John, at a big Unitarian Universalist event with UUs from all over the country. A white man in his 60s came up to us and he started talking to John, saying how happy he was to see him and referencing the conference where they had met last. John was confused and said, "I'm sorry, I was never at that conference. You must be thinking of someone else." The man doubled down. He referenced other parts of the conference, trying to help John remember. And then he said, "You're, let's say, Ted. You're Ted so-and-so, right?" Well, John knew Ted so-and-so, and he was pretty incredulous at the mistake. He said, "Oh my God, you think I'm Ted? No, no, I'm not Ted. Most of us at the table knew both John and Ted. And another white Unitarian Universalist colleague took this man aside and started talking to him while I turned to face John and tend to his hurt and frustration at being mistaken for a different Black Unitarian Universalist man, one who was nothing like him, except that they were both Black men in UU spaces. I mean, like nothing like him. They are different heights and builds, have different face shapes and features. One is loud and playful, and the other one is introverted and quiet. The one is a minister, and the other one's a lay leader. I mean, they're just like very different in most ways that you could think of, except they're both Black men in Unitarian Universalist spaces. Now the intention, action, impact arrow has gone wildly astray, and the stakes are pretty high. Character, trust, worth. And of course, emotions are pretty high around race, given that in the United States, the wounds go back 400 years, and the consequences of racism and white supremacy are life and death, wealth and poverty, acceptance and annihilation. The stakes are high, but the work is similar. For the person who has caused harm, the work is listening to, trusting, and learning from the person who has been harmed. Learning about the pool of hurt that has been accessed by the unintended impact. Learning about what it means to access the stereotype that Black men look alike. Then the work is to honor the other person's worth by focusing on their hurt first and apologizing for it. For the person who's been harmed, the work is tending to their own hurt, tending to their own heart, and deciding if the relationship is worth the work of empathy. In the example with John and Ted, there wasn't a relationship there to begin with the man who mistook John for Ted. But in many of our relationships, there is a relationship that we might decide is worth the work of empathy. If the relationship is a valued one, then the person who's been hurt can direct the other person to where the hurt came from, either by telling them, this is why it hurts me, or giving them some outlines so they can go do their own research about it. If you have caused harm in a relationship across difference, it's important to remember that your intention is not the highest priority in the moment. Rather, the highest priority is tending to the hurt and apologizing for it, and then taking the time to learn about the pool of hurt that you unintentionally accessed so you don't do that again. Was there a stereotype or some type of ism that you didn't know about? Why didn't you know about? Was it living in your head anyway? And do you want it to stay there? This could be an opportunity to research and learn more about this pool of hurt that you weren't aware of, to pack your bags in the middle of the night and leave for being a better person. When we talk about the arrow from intention to action to impact, we have to remember that power affects the kind of understandings that we have about one another. In cases of unintentional harm, oftentimes it is a person with more power unintentionally causing harm to someone with a marginalized identity, because the person who has the dominant identity lacks the understanding of what it means to live in the world with the marginalized identity. There are just entire pools of hurt there that the dominant identity person never learned about, but the marginalized identity person lives with every day. Often, too, the larger world and its oppressions are acting on the brain of the dominant identity person without that person knowing about it. Because of this, in cases of unintentional hurt between someone with a dominant identity and someone with a marginalized identity, it's more important for the person who did the hurtful thing to prioritize compassion and tend to the hurt, and then do the longer work of building the empathy muscle by learning about the pool of hurt that was unknown prior to this moment. Intentions do matter. They do matter. It is so much worse when intention and action and impact are all aligned for harm, like a gunman entering a synagogue during worship, or people in Washington intentionally making it harder for people to vote, especially for people of color to vote. I mean, it would have been worse for my sister if I was intending to hurt her when I made the comment about the tax. And it would have been worse for John if the man at the UU conference intended to communicate that all Black men look alike. But when our intentions don't match our impact and the impact is harm, comparing ourselves to someone who intentionally causes harm is not the best way to repair relationship. Just because someone doesn't intentionally set out to harm doesn't mean harm doesn't happen. And it doesn't mean that that harm doesn't need to be repaired. Indeed, the unintentional harm might point to deeper places, deeper things that need repair. Like with my sister, the harm about the tax and the tip comment pointed to a deeper hurt that needed to be repaired. Or with John, that unintentional harm pointed to a deeper stereotype that needed to be rooted out from the man who caused the harm. Relationships are hard. When we matter to one another, it matters what we do. Having caused harm doesn't mean that a person is bad. And having experienced harm doesn't mean that the relationship is unvaluable. But it does mean that there's repair work to do. The work of empathy, the work of learning, the work of loving one another enough to do better next time. Sometimes the arrow from intention to impact flies astray. It misses the mark. And when it does, we want to repair the harm caused by the arrow. This is Martin Luther King Jr. weekend. And I am praying for repair at the interpersonal level, but also for the world at the big justice level. However, it is so often at the personal level where we fly or falter. I know our congregation is so clearly supportive of the big justice work that folks are doing on this MLK Day weekend, and so supportive of Martin Luther King's legacy of racial justice and voting rights. We will continue to do that justice work, supporting equality, supporting justice under the law, supporting equal votes for all. But we also have room to learn and grow in our relationships, that interpersonal place, our relationships across difference, whether that be with each other or with our partners for justice. Learning is just a sign that we're still here, still alive, still growing, still doing the incredibly hard work of empathy and relationship, still packing our bags in the middle of the night and leaving for our better selves. May we do that together today. May it be so, and amen. It has been a blessing to be together. May you go out from here nourished and renewed, and use that to choose to bless the world. Until we meet again, may you be held, may you be healed, may you be whole. Blessed be, and amen.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.